This is Frank Gaffney with the Center for Security Policy. I'm welcoming you to a Facebook Live presentation of an important new book by one of our senior fellows and distinguished authors. Her name is Deborah Weiss. She is an attorney by training, and when she puts her mind to it, she is a terrific writer, in particular on a subject that is very much, I believe, necessary to all of our understanding of the challenge that we're facing from a phenomenon known as civilization jihad. It is the term that has been coined by a senior operative of the Muslim Brotherhood by the name of Muhammad Akram to describe the way in which jihadists are supposed to try to undermine this country from within by our hands in an important tract that was initially written back in 1991. Muhammad Akram laid all this out for not our consumption, but for that of his leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood back in Egypt. And it's entitled The Explanatory Memorandum on the General Strategic Goal of the Group. And in that booklet, which we've published at the Center for Security Policy Press, available for free, by the way, as a download at securefreedom.org, you will find fascinating information about the extent to which the Brotherhood has now, for some 50 years, been beavering away to try to insert itself into and subvert from within our institutions, our academic, financial, faith, governing institutions, as well as those that are responsible for generating the popular culture, which is the subject of Deborah Weiss's newest book. It's entitled Islamist Influence in Hollywood. And it is also available at securefreedom.org. And I am thrilled to have a chance to talk with Deborah Weiss today about some of her findings and the extent to which they really represent a very important front in this civilization jihad, and not least how far advanced those who are waging it against us, Sharia supremacists, if you will, of the Muslim Brotherhood stripe and perhaps others, to take us down by subverting the popular culture, our awareness of challenges that we're facing, and our willingness to confront them. So with that, let me welcome Deborah Weiss to this Facebook Live conversation, really, about what you found and what the most important takeaways are with respect to this phenomenon of civilization jihad in Hollywood and indeed in America. Welcome.
Right. Well, thank you for having me today. And more importantly, thank you for giving me the opportunity to write this important book and to publish it. I think you've heard me say before that I was very surprised to find out that there was a lot of information there. It sounded a little off, but I think in the broader context, and you did set it up with the civilization jihad, is that people need to be aware that the efforts to subvert Western civilization from within is occurring in every aspect of society. So it's not just on the battlefield, and it's not just cyber warfare, but it's really in popular culture, in academia, and in the interfaith movement as well. We're in a war of ideas. The way I view it is it's Sharia totalitarianism versus freedom. And Frank just told you what the civilization jihad is, and specifically in that 1991 memorandum, I would add that it was a tactic expressly stated that the Muslim Brotherhood and its front groups would form coalitions with progressive organizations and with progressive groups. So that's what they've done with Hollywood and the film industry more broadly. The role of Hollywood is, as Andrew Breitbart said, that policy is downstream, from popular culture. So what that means is that ideas penetrate our popular culture, our youth, the mainstream audiences have certain beliefs. They view the world a certain way, and it's from that belief system that our policies flow. So this effort in Hollywood and in the filmmaking industry is an effort to change the narrative and to alter those fundamental belief systems without the audiences even realizing it. You might think you're just going to a movie for entertainment on Saturday night, and you don't realize the messages that are in there over and over and over throughout the industry that register on an unconscious level, almost like a tachistoscope. You know what a tachistoscope is? When they used to have flashing, I think they made it illegal, I'm not sure, where they'd have a flashing like, buy popcorn, buy this, buy that, and you would all of a sudden get up and subliminal message, and you wouldn't even know it. So what I found was, so this is basically influence operations where they have a specific political goal. They're trying to target mainstream audiences and also government officials and national security people. And the purpose of it is to eventually affect decision-making and policies in the real world. The three tactics that I found as a pattern that are occurring is, number one is censorship. So some of the organizations really focus on censoring the films. They do that by a myriad of ways, by pressuring producers not to show, for example, Muslims as terrorists, or by just protesting, pressuring them, email blasts, whatever the tactic might be, to get all negative messaging about Muslims out. Now, I'm not saying all, that we should have all negative messages about Muslims, but they want Muslims to be exempt. And even if it's factual reporting, like on Islamic terrorism, you have to have the terrorists be anybody except for Muslims. So that's number one, is censorship. Number two is disinformation and propaganda, where they're actually they're making factual assertions that are just incorrect, and they know it, and they're doing it for a political purpose. The other thing is, so I'll be more specific on the issue of Sharia, and I'm sure most of our audience knows, but for those who don't, Sharia, which is a totalitarian ideology, it's not like religion the way we know it in the West, where you just practice it on Saturday or Sunday and it's not in conflict with our laws. It is a total way of life. They have a military aspect, an educational aspect, a financial aspect, and it's an inegalitarian system. So there are different laws for men and women. There are different laws for Muslims and non-Muslims. Freedom of speech isn't allowed. Freedom of religion isn't allowed. Freedom of, if you're gay, it's a capital offense. So while some of those things might occur in the West, when they do, it's illegal. But when it occurs under Sharia, it's not only legal, it's required. So it's a huge difference. And these are the kinds of things that influence operations is designed to conceal. That is the point. So that's number two, the disinformation and propaganda. And then the third one is infiltration. It's the encouragement of Sharia-compliant Muslims to enter into the filmmaking industry for the purpose of changing the public narrative. So it's not innocuous. You can't get, they're not giving out scholarships for doctors or scientists. They're giving them out for people who will be making policy on one hand and who will be changing the culture on the other. And that means script writers, producers, and actors. So
let me ask you, just to pick up on this point. If there is, in fact, an overall agenda behind what might seem to be innocuous scholarships, or what might seem to be simple efforts to consult on the content or even the script of movies or television programs, what is it that, as far as your research is concerned, Deborah Weiss, argues that this is actually an insidious, as you call it, influence operation that advances this purpose of submission, which is ultimately what jihad is all about, whether it's the civilization kind. That I don't think of it so much as a non-violent as much as it's a pre-violent sort of jihad, or for that matter, the more efficient form of jihad, of course, the violent kind.
I'm not sure. I didn't understand the question. Sorry.
The question is basically some of what may seem innocuous is more
how do I know that it's not innocuous?
If it's in fact in the service of jihad, how do you know that's what it is? How do you know from the groups that are performing it or through other means that it is?
So how do I know that there aren't groups that are just accidentally propagating totally false information all the time?
Well, no, let me put it a little less in lovely terms. You've got, for example, reference made from the main stage at the Oscars that inclusion contracts are what you all of you in Hollywood need to be insisting upon. Why is that a problem? For this reason. Explain. Right. In other words, what is it that is at work here that makes it so insidious?
Okay. Well, I'll get to the inclusion contracts in a minute, but in large measure, the organizations that are waging this are Muslim Brotherhood front groups. We know this from a variety of ways, not the least of which is in the back of the 1991 explanatory memorandum, which Frank referenced. There's a list of the organizations, and many of the organizations involved in this effort are on that list.
Okay, so just to break for a second. This list is attached to a memorandum that was meant for the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood in Cairo back in the early 1990s. And it was specifically identifying under the heading, our organizations and organizations of our friends.
Right.
And I think there were 29 groups, if I'm not mistaken, and many, many, many more have been added to the roster since 1991, of course, but that's a clue, as they say in the intelligence business, that you're dealing with people who are associated with the Muslim Brotherhood.
Right.
Okay, so you're seeing evidence that those same groups are now engaged in influence operations.
Right.
Not innocuous consulting things and scholarships, but actual advancing this civilization jihad because of who they are, because of the agenda of those groups, and because of what you've been able to document in terms of what they're accomplishing.
So there's a few ways. One is you can tell by sometimes who they are and who they affiliate with. For example, there's a fairly new organization that's too new to have been on that list, Unity Productions Foundation, yet they work in partnership on a regular basis with many of the groups that are on that list, like MPAC and ISNA. So that's number one. Some of the groups like CARE and MPAC are actually unindicted co-conspirators in the Holy Land Foundation trial, the largest terror financing trial in the history of the United States. Third, I think that if it were random, like they just made a mistake or they were wrong this one time, you wouldn't see the pervasiveness and it's a pattern. I mean, I didn't start out by saying these are the patterns, let me go look for them. The patterns that I'm conveying to you are conclusions I arrived at after a year of research where it was staring me in the face that they're doing the same thing over and over and over. And it just can't, it just can't be a coincidence. And in many cases, they are telling you up front what their goals are. They don't say, oh, our goal is to wage an influence operation, but they do say, our goal is to make Muslims and Islam shown in a more positive light in film. And you can tell by who they are targeting. Are they showing these, some of the organizations are showing these films to law enforcement and national security agencies. So why are they doing that? And I'm hard pressed to believe that they don't know the ideology of their own faith. So so that's the third way, is you can take what they're saying and weigh it against the evidence and the facts. So if you take Muslim Brotherhood documents and Sharia authoritative texts and compare it to what they're saying Sharia is, they don't match up at all. and it's constant, and it's all the time. And they're not really making a secret of the fact that they want to change the narrative, that they want to change how Islam is viewed in the culture. That's an admission they've made. So then the question is the impression they want to give accurate, number one? And if not, why do they want to give that impression? So,
okay, so let's drill down on this a little bit. And I think it's important to say up front that what we're describing here in terms of the activities may be undertaken in the name of all Muslims, but there are plenty of Muslims who aren't interested in advancing the Muslim Brotherhood agenda. They don't seek to take down our country and replace it with a Sharia state. The ones you're documenting, and you've mentioned a couple, for example, the Council on American Islamic Relations, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, this new group, Unity Front Productions Foundation, the Islamic Scholarship Fund. And I want to go through each of these groups and just ask you to give some specific examples, Deborah Weiss, as to how their activities are indicative of not simply, a Muslim-friendly approach in Hollywood, but an Islamist agenda of submission and advancing, often through, as you say, concealing their true agenda and using techniques like censorship and disinformation and infiltration to accomplish their mission of really manipulating our culture and therefore our situational awareness of the threat. So let's start with the Council on American Islamic Relations as one of the most insidious of these groups, not just for what they're doing in Hollywood, but in general.
Right. So actually, while you were talking, it made me think of another point, which is, yes, I mean, nobody is saying that all Muslims are terrible or that Muslims can't make films and do it in good faith. So I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form. What I'm talking about here are particular organizations that appear by the evidence to have an agenda with a patterned practice and that also have nefarious connections. So the other thing about it is it's not just them making the films. I mean, it's them trying to control what other people do with their films. And they can make any film they want. But why are they telling Century Fox, what they should do? And why are they telling Miramax what they should do? And they're not just suggesting it. They're doing it through strong arming, through protests, through email blasts, through threats. Correct. So CARE, their big thing is censorship. And they've been very successful at it over the years. This book focuses on Hollywood film, but I can tell you, having written another book about CARE, that they do it throughout all spheres of society. They try to censor publications, politicians, organizations, through a myriad of tactics. So and
let me just interrupt you, because one of Debbie's other books is a very important one on the effort to suppress freedom of speech, notably a product of the work of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or OIC, but also the Council on American Islamic Relations and other Brotherhood front groups in this country. And so that larger agenda of silencing us, and particularly people who know what they're up to, in the interest of preventing everybody else from being aware, situationally aware, as the military says, is a very important larger agenda. You've just happened to find evidence of it specifically in the Hollywood context as well, right?
Right. So, the OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, have open campaigns to combat what they call defamation of Islam. And what that means is you cannot say anything negative about Islam or Muslims, even if it's true. And they're very open about that. It's basically Islamic blasphemy laws. So if you do this in a Sharia-controlled territory, if you do it in Saudi Arabia, if you do it in Iran, you will be criminally punished. And so they have a campaign. They're not going to say blasphemy laws because they'd be laughed out of the country, but they use words defamation in a way that's very different from defamation in the American system,
right,
where truth is a defense. And it's basically to make sure that other people don't say anything negative, largely for the reason so that they can't be detected, when they're doing something they shouldn't be doing from a national security point of view, and also to make non-Muslims comply with their Sharia blasphemy laws. So CARE's big focus.
And this is where those threats come in. Of course, what we've seen, I assume in Hollywood context as well as more generally, is organizations that claim to be nonviolent will often point to others who will respond perhaps with violence, which is actually not only permissible under Sharia, but it's ordained. It's obligatory that you use techniques to force people to stop blaspheming or otherwise offending Islam. So, Debbie, when you're talking about this in the context of Hollywood, how have those threats been manifesting themselves? Are producers or directors or actors even finding themselves facing sort of a coercive pressure? Is it that explicit,
mostly, or is
it more insidious?
Each organization has different tactics, and CARE does pressure and coerce and strong arm directors and script writers to get scenes from movies edited out. And some production companies, like Century 21, have been so, well, if I say pestered, it's such an understatement, but they've been so harassed, I guess is a better word, by organizations like by CARE, that they actually often have pre-screenings for CARE to avoid the ramifications of doing the movie the way they see fit. A couple of quick examples.
Give some examples.
A couple of quick examples from CARE is the Sum of All Fears, which was based on a Tom Clancy book about Islamic terrorists, and somehow they got the protagonist changed to Australian neo-Nazis. I haven't seen the film, but I have heard from those who have seen it that the movie doesn't make any sense, and now you know why. True Lies with Arnold Schwarzenegger, they were unable to get scenes taken away, but they were able to get a disclaimer put in at the end of the film saying that nothing you saw in the film represents the actions or beliefs of a particular religion. We wonder which one they're talking about. Kingdom of Heaven, which was a film about the battle for the soul of Jerusalem, wound up being done in a way where it showed the Christians as murderers and the Muslims as morally superior. And that is just a short sampling of the movies that CARE has been able to change. But there are other organizations have used other tactics. CARE's tactic is focused on censorship.
Yeah. My recollection is that the TV series 24 started out with a season that was all about essentially countering the jihad, and then suddenly went into all of this neo-Nazis and white supremacists and other bad actors.
Yes, and that was because of CARE. They did pressure CARE, so it started out one way, and Gordon Howard, the executive producer, was approached by CARE. According to him, he's had some epiphany and actually works to get other screenwriters and producers to change their narrative now too.
So that is another place where influence operations are at work. Talk to us about the Muslim Public Affairs Council, Deborah Weiss.
Muslim Public Affairs committee. Actually, I was very surprised to find they actually have a Hollywood bureau. They have a whole.
I think they're based out in LA, are they not?
I'm not sure. I'm not really sure, but they have a Hollywood bureau which is dedicated to providing consulting services to script writers and producers on anything that's Islam related, to provide information on what's of concern to Muslims, to, according to them, to give it context. So whether it's political or cultural or religious, they want the producers to be taking that into account. They also have networking events to give young Muslims a leg up so that they can meet producers if they're interested in entering that field. And they also have pre-screen. The way they word it is they offer pre-screenings so that producers can get input from Muslim organizations, but it's really not an opportunity for the producers. It's really, you know, in order to avoid being harassed later. So I mean,
boycotts.
I mean, why would you have Muslims and give input, and you don't do it for Jews and Buddhists and Christians? And you know, it's just this particular religion that's getting the benefit of
again,
their
I think one of the points that I think is so important in your work and more generally a series that we've produced, of which your 2 books are important contributions, the Civilization Jihad Reader series, is that what we're dealing with are people who are actually promoting, under the guise of a faith, really an ideology, a totalitarian political, military, legal system. And that's what's so alarming about this, is that's being obscured in part through the disinformation and propaganda activities of groups like the Muslim Public Affairs Committee.
Denial and deception. Denial
and deception, right. Maskirovka, as the Russians call it. How about Unity Productions Foundation?
Yeah, a fair amount of the book is dedicated to research done on the Unity Productions Foundation, which is one of the newer organizations. It is a nonprofit organization that claims to promote peace through media. They do, according to them, they do documentaries. However, if you start researching the content of the documentaries, what you find is that they're a mixture of fact and fiction, which is the classic definition of disinformation, right? And they're very open about the fact that they're trying to produce documentaries to make Islam shown in a more positive way. The 2 men that started this company are both Muslim converts, Alex Kronemer and Michael Wolff. And Michael Wolff, in his former life, was a producer. And Alex Kronemer was a State Department employee for a while. He was also the U.S. delegate to the UN on the Human Rights Commission, back when it was a commission. He also worked for the Institute of Peace, the U.S. Institute of Peace. And to this day, they both remain extremely connected to both government officials and to Hollywood. I have watched them almost from their birth, when they had very short 5-minute films.
Birth of the organization, you mean, not
right.
individuals?
Yes, I think, right, the birth of their organization. I wasn't at their actual birth, fortunately. So when they had 5-minute films in the beginning, and they now have full-blown, quote, documentaries, we are so naive. We don't, how many people actually watch those documentaries and say, let me check out those facts? I did it. But most people don't. These documentaries are often shown on PBS, and I'm quite sure PBS just says, oh, thank you. We didn't know this before. I mean, I became alerted to that particular phenomenon when they had a premiere at the Warner Theater. And I really didn't want to go for they had a panel, and I really didn't want to see the whole thing because I figured I've heard this before and I'm busy, but I'm sure. So to get a good seat, since there was first come, first serve, I had to go early. And they had a panel which included people from the State Department, some surprise appearances that weren't on the program, and I think on purpose because they didn't want people to know they were there. And it was called, the movie was called Enemy of the Reich, and I also wrote a separate article about that in Front Page Magazine, allegedly about a woman who was inspired by her Muslim faith to save Jews during World War II. And I hung around in the lobby after the film and listened to the comments and spoke to a few people in the audience. And there were a lot of them who were saying, wow, that was so interesting. I didn't know that. And I had a different reaction. I'm Jewish. Half my family was killed by the Nazis. And I came out and I thought, not, oh, that's interesting, I didn't know that, but, oh, that's interesting, why have I heard nothing about this? Is it true? And I found out through 2 weeks of dedicated research just to that one film that some of it was, some of it wasn't. There's no doubt that this woman was a hero. They made it, I mean, eventually you saw through the film that she was a decoder, but in the little talks beforehand and the way they market the film, they make it sound like she was hiding Jews in her basement.
Schindler.
So, yeah. Exactly. I mean, she was brave and heroic, no question, but she was a decoder as part of the Allies, you know, and
the war effort.
The British Allies. It was a dangerous job. She seems to have good morals. She wasn't in any way Muslim, the way we understand Muslim. She was raised in a Sufi home and a particular order called the Christie Order, which where her father, who was very high up in that order, actually overtly denounced Islam. Okay. And she was raised to believe in equality and love and many of the things that traditional Islam is, you know, abhors. And
especially Sharia, right?
And even then, there's no evidence at all that she was observant to Sufi. She was raised in a very liberal home, a very liberal egalitarian home. And one more thing about her I wanted to just add is they omitted the fact that she was engaged to a Jew. And I can't believe that was an error, you know, like an oversight, because there was a large, you know, Jew.
An inconvenient fact.
Yes, exactly.
Describe it. So, Deborah Weiss, you're describing some of the research that you've done in your book, Islamist Influence in Hollywood, and you are depicting what seems to be a pretty clear-cut example of propaganda,
right,
designed to obscure the fact that you know, Quranic teaching and Sharia that's built upon it does not call for protecting Jews, at least in the operative parts, the ones that are not the abrogated parts, as they say, but the operative part, the end chronologically of the Quran.
Oh, they're treated as second-class citizens.
At best.
At best.
At worst, they are, you know, to be actually called out for destruction behind the rocks, the apes and the pigs and all of that. So I get what the motivation is of these groups that either are or have associations with Sharia supremacism. What I don't quite get is why Hollywood, which is, after all, very prominently populated in leadership, many of these studios and other parts of the industry, by Jewish people, would not see through this kind of rewriting or misconstruing or propagandizing in the manner that you have. Is it that they are willfully blind? We see a lot of that, not just in Hollywood, needless to say, but here in Washington too. Or is something else going on? Are they feeling threatened by this pressure or the fear that they will be seen as politically incorrect, or otherwise, you know, are they being compelled, in other words, to do what they're doing here?
Well, I'm not sure that you can make a blanket statement about the state of mind of each individual or organization that is allying with Islamic supremacist groups. But clearly, there is what we call a red-green axis, where it used to be the far left, but let's face it, it's the left now. It's mainstreamed, where there is an alliance. And I think under the theory that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, they both revere some kind of totalitarian ideology, whether it's the communist utopia or the Sharia caliphate that they want. And the first order of business is to subvert the West from within. So their common goal is to upheave Western civilization, and they can fight out the details later about what kind of utopia they will build on the ashes of that. I think there's obviously...
And this is so important because it's an impediment to the achievement of their designs, that the United States, as it's currently constitutionally configured and operates as a democracy and so on, is an obstacle to achieving that end state. There may be very different end states, as you said, but what brings them together, joined forces, is to get rid of the obstacle.
Sure, and I think the left, and in some cases the Islamists, have co-opted the narrative. I mean, what's going on in college campuses now, Frank, and I'm sure you're aware of it, but do you know how bad it is? Honestly, if I have kids, they would not be going to a mainstream college, period, the end. They are it's not just a little bit of political correctness. It is to the point where they don't hear alternative views. There is no intellectual debate. Merely having an alternative view is verboten on college campuses. Conservative speakers are shut down. They're getting brainwashed. There's no other way to put it. They're getting brainwashed with leftist indoctrination. And the Islamists are smart enough to know that that ideology is a friend to them and a foe to freedom. And so they've joined forces, and it makes no sense from a rational point of view that political correctness would embrace Sharia compliant ideology. But when you are being fed a studied diet that excludes the facts of what Sharia stands for and instead says, oh, you're discriminating against Muslims and we want to have an inclusive, representation, then, and critical thinking skills are out the window, then you say, oh, that sounds so sweet, that sounds so nice, let's sing Kumbaya and hold hands.
But let me just ask you one question on this point, Deborah Weiss, because as you know, as we all know, much is being made at the moment, rightly, I think, by and large, in Hollywood, of the mistreatment of women.
Right.
Misogyny is the technical term for it, I think.
Right.
And what's so, I guess, just stupefying, really, is when you understand how women are treated under Sharia, this sort of whitewashing or fundamental transformation, to use Obama's phrase, of Sharia into something benign and wonderful and inclusive and tolerant and consistent with all of our values. In fact, it is institutionalized misogyny of the most horrific kind. And again, I'm not saying that all Muslims practice their faith in that manner, but that is the authoritative practice of Sharia.
And the same thing with the treatment of gays, and the same thing with the treatment of Jews. And this
again, much in evidence in Hollywood and supposedly revered. So are they missing the point here? Or is it the effectiveness of these techniques of censoring and propagandizing and disinforming and infiltrating?
I think it's the latter. Okay. I think it's the latter. I don't see courses. I mean, I've gone to a few interfaith panels. I can't really go to any more. That might, it's just too upsetting. But I like to see what goes on the other side. And, these panels are designed to tell an unwitting audience that people like you and me are trying to discriminate against people who just happen to be of a different faith, in the same way that Catholics were discriminated against when they first came to America. And that's just simply not the case. We're trying to alert the public and national security apparatus about a real threat to our freedom and our national security. And yet, the way we're being characterized, we're haters, we're bigots, we're Islamophobic. And the only reason I think they're really allowed to get away with this is because they're cloaking their ideology in the language of religion. If they had a godless figurehead who was doing the same thing, it would be much harder to carry that narrative and to conceal the true intention. So,
except, as you say, you do have communists who ostensibly have this godless
yes, Frank, but they're
system.
They're implementing it the wrong way in the countries that have it. And so are all of the Sharia compliant. Yes.
Venezuela is just
all the Sharia compliant countries, the reason they're so abusive and oppressive and tyrannical is because they're doing it the wrong way, as are the communist countries. There's not one example on either side that's doing it the right way, but that's the problem.
Yeah. Well, and obviously you're being facetious when you say that.
Yes.
But I understand that's the line. That is the party line, both on the left and the
I did want to talk a little more about the UPF itself, if that's okay, because it's not enough to know that they're creating what I refer to as faux documentaries. They have a number, they're very well funded, and they have a number by the way, their films are very good quality too. And they have a number of programs and initiatives that if you research that, if you read this book, I did the research for you. I actually went off on a tangent, on a national security tangent, and researched, for example, Connecting Cultures, which is a separate organization run by the wife of Alex Kronemer, although he's on the staff there. And they, quote, train government agencies. They're a GSA-approved contractor during the Obama administration. They trained lots of U.S. attorneys across the country to correct, quote, misperceptions on Islam. If you look at some of their videos and trainings, it's basically to give Muslims preferential treatment in situations where they're likely to be arrested, so that you don't disrespect them or treat them in a way that's offensive, all under the guise of respect and religious accommodation. But if you or I committed or allegedly committed those same crimes, then we would be treated, and we wouldn't be treated with the kid gloves that they're advocating for Muslims. They have outreach programs to schools, which these films are not just shown on PBS and in movie theaters. They are shown in schools, accompanied by lesson plans to foster dialogue. They're shown in interfaith programs. They're shown in government agencies. They have given presentations to the Pentagon, to TSA, to the Department of Homeland Security. So how do I know they're infiltrating? Well, they're very proud to tell you where they're going. And if you look at all of the programs that they're running, you can see that Miramax isn't giving presentations to the Pentagon. Century 21 isn't giving presentations to the Pentagon. They're not training law enforcement. I think what they're doing speaks for itself.
It does indeed. There's another group here that I wanted to see if you had anything to say about them as well, Deborah Weiss, and that is the Islamic Scholarship Fund. What is it, and what does it contribute to this campaign?
The Islamic Scholarship Fund is smaller, but they do have more of the tactic of infiltration. They offer very, very large scholarships, generally in the amount of either $10,000 or $20,000 for Muslims who want to make, quote, documentaries or films that have a positive narrative on Islam. The requirement is they have to show, that has to be the goal of the film. Sometimes they ask for affiliation requirements, like, do you belong to ISNA, or do you belong to these groups that let them know that your ideology is of like mind. And they're very open about what their mission is. At least when I looked it up, if they don't change it after hearing this Facebook live presentation, they were very open that their mission is to influence the public narrative, to change the perceptions. And they also work with MPAC on a leadership development program where they place interns in congressional positions. So these scholarships are not available. If you want to become a doctor or a scientist, you can forget about getting any money, because their goal isn't to foster education of any kind. They direct these funds only and specifically to fields where they can influence social policy ultimately, and in the shorter term, the discussion on the subject of Islam.
Yeah. Fascinating. Let me ask you about, in addition, it's just sort of two more general topics. Independent films, on the one hand, and actors who have come to embrace this program.
Right. A lot of these organizations are very involved in independent films, and the reason for that is it's easier to break into that industry. They can make their own films and propagate their own propaganda. A lot of times they have film festivals, very involved in anti-Israel film festivals, for example. Some of them are getting involved in and playing a bigger role in film festivals, like I'm trying to remember which one it was now. There's so much in there. One of them that actually sponsored was a corporate sponsor for Robert Redford's Sundance Festival. So they're getting it's easier for them to break in. And their theory, at least for the people who've spoken up, have said they feel that if they can start with that and they have an audience, that eventually the bigger companies will jump on board, will fall into place. As far as the actors go, you know, when I first started researching it, since it was so long ago, originally the influence was mostly in one direction. Mostly, not entirely, but it was mostly the Islamist organizations trying to influence Hollywood and the film industry. But I have to say that after this last election, as most of you can see, most of you who now have broken families and cut off friendships and lots of hostile comments on your Facebook, you know, the world is topsy-turvy, at least here. And they've really, in my view, the left has become unhinged after this election. They've lost all rationality. And not this past Oscars, but the last Oscars, where, you know, it's supposed to be about rewarding talent in the filmmaking industry. And instead, it was just a platform to spew forth political rhetoric all on one side. And so in terms of where it comes together is, for example, on Trump's travel ban, which was really A, a temporary ban, B, just to give them a chance to vet out terrorists. Gee, is that a bad thing? The list of countries was created by Obama. It excluded a large majority of Muslim countries, and yet it was characterized by the left and those in Hollywood as a Muslim ban. And a lot of what he's doing is getting mischaracterized as bigotry against Muslims, and they've just ramped up their affinity to snuggle up to Islamic supremacists, mostly because they all just hate Trump. I went to a presentation at Georgetown right before the election, and it was supposed to be on bigotry against Islam. And when people in the audience asked what can they do, the answer was don't vote for Trump. So I think now you see much more of that. And then you have the people that were always on board, Ben Affleck, who had that discussion with Bill Maher, who lost his cool on TV when Bill Maher just said something like, you know, Islam doesn't stand for liberal values and liberals ought to speak up. And Ben Affleck really got upset and said, oh, you know what it is? And Bill Maher said, yes, I do. But I guess Ben Affleck knows better. So, and it was Ben Affleck. I'll tell you another one, which was very hard for me to find. I'm very proud of myself for finding it because it wasn't easy to find. But as a 9/11 survivor from New York, I knew that Richard Gere had spoken in Central Park shortly after the 9/11 attacks and said something to the effect of, what we need now is to show empathy for the terrorists. And even in a liberal city like New York, he got completely booed. So there's...
But that was then.
This
is a very different time, I'm afraid.
The inclusion, Debbie, you want to talk about the inclusion, Marner?
Well, I think we're almost out of time. I wanted to give you a chance to speak to that if you want to, as well as funding and what you've been able to ascertain about the money that is presumably facilitating a lot of this kind of influence operation.
Right. I don't have information that things are specifically funded for specific projects. You know, when you have a nonprofit, or a lot of times the money is just donated and they use it, they designate it the way they see fit, although obviously the funders are usually aware of the general projects. The UPF gets a lot of its money from North Africa, from the Middle East, and from government agencies like the U.S. Institute of Peace, where one of the founders used to be an employee, and the National Endowment of the Humanities. So I'm a little bit flabbergasted that our taxpayer dollars are going to fund this effort, but I'm equally flabbergasted that national security and other government agencies are hosting organizations like that to train them. Yeah. Why are they doing that? So I'll just say that influence operations are most successful when the target audiences are unaware that they are being waged. And the purpose of this book is to shine a light on those operations so that when you go to a movie and you see Richard Gere, or you see George Clooney in a nice movie about Syria where, everything is, up is down and down is up. Now you will recognize that. You will recognize that. And I really hope that professionals in the national security community, as well as the general public, will look with a more critical eye to what is happening. And that ultimately, instead of being brainwashed by an onslaught of movie after movie after movie, that truth will prevail after you have some critical reflection.
Deborah Weiss, I want to just say thank you once again for this terrific book, as well as your previous one on the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and its war against free speech. Really important analyses and documentation of the nature of and the success of Sharia supremacist civilization jihad in our own country. These are the sorts of things that I hope you will take advantage of. Again, they're available for free as a downloadable PDF at securefreedom.org to become aware, to gain situational awareness, as we've been discussing, of a really insidious threat to our country from within by people you are being discouraged from understanding at every turn. Deborah, this is a great credit to you, and the work that you put into it, I think, has really borne fruit, and I hope that our listeners today and at our next event coming up shortly will be enriched by the chance to take aboard Islamist influence in Hollywood.
It's an easy read, and it names, it's an inside names of the actors that you've seen and the movies that you've gone to. So make sure you buy it.
Check it out. Thanks for joining us for this Facebook Live program with Deborah Weiss. I hope you will join us again in our coming ones. For all of us here at the Center for Security Policy, this is Frank Gaffney. Thanks so much.